Now, the January effect is in hiding right now. Typically, small caps doing well in the first month of the year, but we're not really seeing that this week. The Russell 2000 closing at its lowest level since the banking crisis on Wednesday. Our next guest, though, thinks that despite the rocky start, small caps have the potential to outperform some of those larger cap names. So for more on this, we're going to turn to Jonathan Boyar, Boyar Research President. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. I'm just curious, what do you think is the single biggest driver of the movement that we're seeing in small caps right now, given that the technicals tend to tell us it's going to be a good time for them?
First, thank you for having me, and Happy New Year. Yeah, I mean, listen, the last couple of weeks, we look at things on a longer term basis. We had a great last quarter to end the year. We're only a couple of trading days into the year. I wouldn't analyze that too much. But each year we come out with something called our Forgotten 40, which is our 40 best ideas for the year ahead that have, shorter term catalysts. And I think it's telling this year that 19 of the 40 names have market caps of less than 10 billion, and many are significantly less than 5 billion. So that's where I think a lot of the action is going to be. Small caps have underperformed significantly since 2015, 2016 by about 6% a year compared to the S&P 500. So regardless of how well the Russell might have done to end the year, there's a lot of catching up to do if you go back to historical norms.
Yeah, when you take a look at some of those individual names that have been underperforming the broader market here for quite some time, drilling down to the fundamentals, what are some of the common themes or common areas that you're looking for when you're trying to identify the most opportunistic, or where you're finding the most opportunity at this point?
Well, small caps, by the nature of them being small and underfollowed, is where we can find the most value. So you look for hidden assets, things that aren't properly reflected on a balance sheet. For example, one of the companies that was in this year's Forgotten 40 is IAC. They own a stake in something called Toro, which is a ride-sharing app. It's basically the Airbnb for car sharing. And they own a 30% stake in it. It's on their balance sheet for about $300 million. It's probably worth triple that. And on a $5 billion company, that is significant. So that's the things that we look for, these hidden assets, things that other people aren't looking for.
Well, I know that you also have MSGS as one of your picks, but when you think about both of these names, what's the most important thing that you can look at to find that? I know you do this professionally, but for our retail investors who can't have the luxury of doing this all day, every day, where can they look on the balance sheet to determine some of those edges?
It's just reading. It's just spending your time looking for these things. You have to look at the entire balance sheet. You have to look for, and see what's on it. See if there's anything that just doesn't make sense. Do they have buildings on there that are at that are at crazily low valuations because they were bought many years ago? So it's just a case-by-case basis. There's no magic formula. It's just doing your homework. But individual investors can certainly do that at home.
Jonathan, what do you think is going to take for the markets to stabilize here? I know you led off by saying you don't want to read too much into a couple of days trading action, but a lot of investors have been looking at the losses that we have been seeing over the last couple of days and are getting a bit worried. When do you expect that to stabilize a bit?
That's the billion-dollar question. I have no idea. There's a lot to worry about. Who knows what's going on, will happen in the Middle East. We do have an election this year, which is going to might cause some issues. But there's always reasons not to invest in the stock market. You can always scare yourself into saying something terrible is going to happen. But over the long run, if you buy undervalued stocks and hold on to them for long periods of time, generally good things happen.
We've talked fundamentals and now macro. I want to go technicals with you for a second on the Russell, because the Russell hitting the 21-day moving average and a trend line that's been in place since the October lows. And I know we talked about how small caps do tend to outperform in January, but I'm curious whether the Russell hitting some of these levels changes your thinking on small caps, given that your 40 list came out before we saw this trend line.
The technicals we stay away from as fundamental long-term investors. Listen, there's value in doing that, but to us, you can end up outsmarting yourselves. And whether you get something at 5% below or 5% above, if you think something is worth double where it is now, it doesn't really matter.
I'm falling victim to the technicals notes that I read every morning, is what you're telling me.
Those notes you might want to avoid.
Okay.
All right, there we have it. All right, Jonathan Boyar, always great to have you. Thanks so much again. Top picks here, IAC and MSG, at least among the top 40 picks that you're seeing for this year. Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you.